She came up the long drive at Harrowgate Palace, as if the gravel itself had been laid for her feet, and the first words she ever spoke to me were not a greeting but a command. "You take these." I did not move. I stand the east gate post on the lower forecourt, where the carriage drive sweeps in beneath the lime trees and the visitors arrive for the public hours, and in 11 years on that stone I have learned that the world divides cleanly into people who see a man in a red tunic and people who see a fixture. She was the second kind. She did not look at my face. She looked at a height somewhere around my collar buttons, the way a person looks at a coat hook, and she let go of her bags. There were 4 of them matched, the leather the color of dark honey, brass corners catching the late sun. They dropped against my boots with the small expensive thud that good luggage makes, and she had already half turned away before they landed, certain, utterly, serenely certain, that the things she had set down would be lifted by the man she had set them down upon. My name is Corporal Edmund Hale. I serve in the Queen's Foot Guard of the Royal House of Harrowgate in the Kingdom of Eldermore, and on that afternoon I had been standing my post for 2 hours and 40 minutes without speaking, without shifting my weight, without doing anything at all that a statue could not do better. That is the work. People think the stillness is the easy part. It is not. The stillness is the whole of it. A man can be trained to march, to shoot, to stand a night watch in driving rain. The rarest thing the guard ever asks of you is to be addressed as furniture and remain, in your own mind, a man. So I let the bags lie. I kept my eyes forward, level with the far gate, the way the drill demands, and I waited to see what she would do when the world failed to obey her. It took her 4 steps to notice. I heard them, the click of heels meant for marble, awkward on the old cobbles, and then the click stopped, and there was a silence with a temperature to it, the cooling silence of a woman discovering that a thing has not happened which always, always happens. I said, she told the back of my head, "Take these." I have a voice. The guard does not forbid us to speak. That is a tourist's myth, useful to us, and we do nothing to correct it. We are simply expected to know to the inch when speaking serves the post and when silence does. There are men who have stood 40 years on the Harrowgate stones and spoken aloud on duty fewer than 40 times. I am not so spare as that. But I weigh every word, because a word from a man who is supposed to be silent carries more than a word from a man who chatters, and I had already weighed this one and found it ready. I turned my head, only my head, a slow quarter, the body still squared to the gate, and I looked at her for the first time. She was perhaps 35, dressed in the careful, costly way of someone who wants to look as though she has never thought about money, which is a thing only people who think about it constantly manage to achieve. Pale coat, dark glasses pushed up into bright hair, a small dog's worth of fur at her collar though the day was warm. Behind her, further down the drive, a hired car idled with its boot open, and a driver leaning against it, studying his shoes with the deep concentration of a man who has decided that whatever is about to happen is not his to witness. "Ma'am," I said. It was one word, and it stopped her because it was not the word she expected. She expected motion. She expected the bags to rise. The sound of my voice, level and unhurried, was so far outside the shape of the moment she had built that for a half-second she simply blinked at me. "Good," she said, recovering, and gestured at the luggage with 2 fingers, the way you would point a dog at a stick. "The lift's that way, I presume. I'm in the east apartments. The Lady Coverley party were expected. Do be quick, the leather marks." "I'm not able to carry your bags, ma'am," I said. She laughed. It was a short, bright, disbelieving sound, the laugh of a person who has heard a joke that cannot possibly be meant. "Don't be absurd. Of course you can. You're standing right here." "I'm on post, ma'am." "You're standing about." She said it as a correction, gently, as though I had simply got the words wrong and she was helping. "You're not doing anything. Look at you. You've been there the whole time I've been coming up the drive. I watched you. You haven't moved an inch. Your decoration. I'm not asking you to do something difficult. I'm asking you to make yourself useful for 30 seconds, which I should think you'd be glad of. I will tell you what went through me when she said asterisk decoration, because it is the truth, and because the truth is the only thing in this story worth your time. What went through me was not anger. I had been in the guard long enough that anger no longer arrived first. It had learned to queue. What arrived first was a kind of old, tired recognition. The recognition of a thing I had met 100 times in 100 faces. The small and bottomless human certainty that the person in the uniform is less than the person in the coat. It is not cruelty, exactly. She would not have called it cruelty. She would have been astonished to be told she had been cruel. It is something colder and more ordinary than cruelty. It is the simple inability to imagine that the still man has an inside. And I had a choice in that half-second, the same choice I have had 100 times. I could carry the bags. It would have been the easy thing, easier than this, easier by far. 3 minutes, 4, up to the East Apartments and back. No one would have docked me for it. The sergeant of the gate might even have nodded. Keeps the guests sweet, no harm done. I could have been a porter for 4 minutes and gone back to being a man. But that is the trap. And I had learned the shape of the trap long before that afternoon. The trap is that it is never 4 minutes. The trap is that the bags are not the thing. The bags are a test she did not know she was setting, and the answer she wanted was not yes, I will carry these. The answer she wanted, the thing she had wanted from the moment she let the leather drop against my boots, was for the world to confirm what she already believed, that some men are furniture, and that she could tell, at a glance, which ones. I was not going to confirm it. The staff and service entrance, I said, and I lifted my chin a fraction toward the archway at the eastern end of the forecourt, where the old kitchen court ran back behind the wall, is through there. The porter's lodge is the first door on the right. They'll see your luggage up to the East Apartments directly, ma'am, and they'll do it properly. They're trained for the leather. They'll take good care of it. She stared at me. It's not my duty, ma'am, I said. I keep the gate. And then I turned my head back to its proper place, eyes forward, level with the far stone, and I became once more a man standing still, except that the stillness had changed its meaning entirely, and we both knew it, and the bags lay where she had dropped them between us, like a sentence neither of us had finished. For a long moment she did nothing, and I felt rather than saw the shape of her recalibrating. People like her are not used to no asterisk that comes without apology stapled to it. They are used to no asterisk with a great deal of softening packed around it. I'm so sorry, ma'am, I wish I could, but you see. And the softening is its own kind of yielding, because it says I am sorry to deny you. I know I ought to give you what you want. The rules and not my judgment prevent me. I had given her none of that. I had given her the bare bone of the thing, asterisk not my duty, and laid it down flat, and there was nothing in it for her to push against, no apology to lever open, no doubt to widen. So she did what such people do when the polite levers fail. She raised her voice. Not a shout, she would never have shouted. Shouting was for people without the resources to make others quiet, but a clear, carrying, public sort of voice, pitched to gather an audience and to shame. Do you know who I am? I have heard that question more times than I have heard my own name spoken on duty. It is, I think, the single most reliable sign in the world that a person is about to behave badly. No one who is anyone asks it. The Queen has never in her life asked a soul if they knew who she was. She does not need to, and more than that, it would not occur to her, because the asking is not really a question. It is a threat with the manners left on. Do you know who I am means I am about to make you regret this, and I am giving you one chance to make me unnecessary. No, ma'am, I said, eyes forward, I keep the gate. It was true twice over, and that is why I said it. I did not know who she was, and it did not matter who she was, and the two facts braced each other. The gate does not care for names. A duchess and a fishwife are the same weight of person to a closed gate. That is the whole dignity of the thing, that the stone treats them alike, and I am only the part of the gate that can speak. I heard her breathe in. I am Mrs. Honoria Vale, she said, and she said the name as if it were a sum of money. I am the guest of Lady Coverley, who is the guest of the mistress of the robes, and we are expected at a private reception this evening. So I would think very carefully, if I were you, about whether you want the story of how a footman in a fur hat refused a simple courtesy to reach the people I am about to spend my evening with. Because it will reach them. I will see to it that it reaches them. And then we shall see how much you enjoy keeping your little gate. There it was, the whole machinery of it, laid bare in a sentence, the assumption that there were people above me whom she could reach and I could not, that those people would take her side as a matter of course because she and they were the same kind of person and I was the other kind, that my livelihood hung on the goodwill of strangers I had never met, and that she could pull it out from under me with a few words at a reception over wine. She believed all of it. You could hear that she believed it. That is what made it almost sad, standing there in the warm afternoon with the lime trees stirring. She was not bluffing. She had reached for the most dangerous thing she possessed, and she had brought it out and shown it to me, fully expecting me to fold. I did not fold, but I will not pretend to you that nothing moved in me when she said it. Something did. Not fear, I want to be exact, because exactness is the only honesty I have to offer, not fear of her, but a brief, cold awareness of how the world is actually arranged, which is a thing a man in my position learns young and never quite stops feeling. She was not entirely wrong about the machinery. The machinery is real. A guest of the mistress of the robes does have lines I cannot reach. Words spoken over wine do travel, and they do not travel with my version attached. A man can be exactly right and lose, and the losing teaches nothing to the people who arranged it. I knew all that, and I kept the gate anyway because the alternative to lift the bags now after she had threatened me, was so much worse than losing that it did not bear thinking on. To carry them before would have been a kindness misjudged. To carry them after this would be a surrender, and the difference between a kindness and a surrender is the whole of a man. The porter's lodge is the first door on the right, through the eastern arch, ma'am, I said. They open until 8. If your luggage has been here on the forecourt over long, they'll see it up the faster for it. I let a small breath sit between us, then added, because it was true and because she had earned the truth of it landing plainly, I'm sorry you've had a long journey. The lodge will look after you well. It was the closest thing to softening I had given her, and it was not the kind she wanted. She wanted the softening that yields. I had given her the softening that does not sympathy without surrender, which to a person like Mrs. Honoria Vale is more infuriating than open contempt, because contempt she could have fought, and this she could not. This slid out from under her hands like water. For a moment I thought she might pick up the bags herself and walk to the arch, and the whole thing would end there, small and forgotten. I have seen it go that way. Pride is heavy, but it is not always heavier than 4 leather cases and a driver watching. It did not go that way. She left the bags where they lay. She turned on her heel, that sharp marble heel turn that found no purchase on the cobbles and nearly betrayed her, so that she had to put a hand out briefly to the gatepost to steady herself, which only hardened her further, and she walked, not toward the eastern arch in the porter's lodge, but up toward the great doors of the palace proper, toward the visitors' hall and the people inside it. Leaving her 4 honey-colored cases sitting at my boots in the middle of the forecourt like an accusation, she intended to come back for with reinforcements. I let her go. There was nothing else to do. A man on post does not chase a guest across the forecourt to argue, and I would not have argued if I could. The argument was over the moment I declined to have it. But I marked which doors she went through, and I marked the tightness in her shoulders, and I knew, with the dull certainty of long experience, that I had not seen the last of Mrs. Honoria Vale that day. People who say we shall see how much you enjoy keeping your gate do not let the matter drop. They go and find the lever they were so sure existed, and they pull it, and then they come back to watch. The driver down the drive finally looked up. He caught my eye for the first time, a tired man in middle age, a working man, the kind who spends his life ferrying the Honoria veils of the world and absorbing the overflow of their tempers. He gave me a look I knew well. It was not sympathy, exactly. Sympathy was a luxury his afternoon did not allow. It was recognition. "I see what just happened," the look said. "I have stood where you are standing. There's no good way out of it. Good luck to you." Then he got back into his car because the bags were not his to carry either, and the engine turned over, and he eased the hired car back down the drive and was gone, and the 4 cases sat alone on the cobbles in a widening pool of late afternoon light. I want to set down now, before the rest of it happens, why this mattered to me, why a small rudeness on a warm afternoon was worth the stand I took, when I could have spared myself everything that followed by bending my back for 4 minutes. Because if you cannot feel the weight of that, the rest of the story will only look like a quarrel over baggage, and it was never a quarrel over baggage. My grandfather kept this same gate. Not the rank, he was a yeoman porter, not a guard, but the gate, the literal stone, the east gate of Harrowgate, for 31 years, and he died with his keys still on the ring at his belt, which by old custom were buried with him, the only thing the crown ever let a porter take into the ground. I never knew him. He was gone before I was born. But my father knew him, and my father told me, when I was small and full of the wrong ideas about what made a man important, the one thing his father had told him about the work. "They will try to make you small," my grandfather had said. "The grand ones, the ones who arrive in good coats. They will try it because making you small makes them feel large, and it costs them nothing, and they have been doing it to porters and footmen and guards since before the stones were cut. And you cannot stop them trying, but you can decide every single time whether they succeed. That is the only part of it that belongs to you. They own the coats and the carriages and the names. They do not own that. That one thing is yours, and no one can take it unless you hand it over." My father gave me that the night before I first took the oath, sitting at the kitchen table with his hands around a cold cup of tea, and at the time I thought it was a sentimental thing an old man had said and a younger man had kept out of love. I was 20. I thought the test of a guard would be danger. The night a man came over the wall, the moment a crowd turned ugly, the hour you had trained for and dreaded. And those moments come, and I have stood them, and they are hard. But they are not the test. The danger is honest. It announces itself. It asks you only to be brave, which is the simplest thing a man can be asked. The real test, the one that comes 100 times a year and wears no uniform, is exactly the one Mrs. Vale set down at my boots without ever knowing she was setting it. Will you let me make you small? It costs you nothing to say yes. It will cost you something to say no. Choose. I had chosen. My grandfather's gate, my grandfather's word, and a stranger's honey-colored luggage on the cobbles in the sun. I stood and I kept the gate, and I waited for the lever to come back and find me. It came faster than I expected, and it did not come as I expected, and that the way it came is where this stops being the story of one rude woman and one stubborn guard, and becomes something larger, something that reached up through the whole household and ended in a room I had never in 11 years been permitted to enter. But I am ahead of myself. First the lever. First the sergeant of the gate, crossing the forecourt toward me at the brisk, unhappy pace of a man who has just been told something over a telephone that he would much rather not have heard. His name was Sergeant Pell, and he was a good man, and I watched him come, and I knew before he opened his mouth that Mrs. Vale had found her people, and that they had moved faster than even she could have hoped, and that the afternoon was about to become a great deal longer than the keeping of one gate. Pell stopped a pace off, squared up, and lowered his voice to the register men use when they are passing on an order they do not own and do not love. "Hale, what happened with the lady, the cases?" "A guest set 4 cases down at my post, Sergeant," I said, "and ordered me to carry them up to the east apartments." I declined, and directed her to the porter's lodge through the eastern arch. She declined the lodge and went up to the visitors' hall. The cases are where she left them. I did not editorialize. A report is a report. The color you leave out of a report is the color that gets you in trouble later. Pell looked at the cases. He looked at me. He breathed out through his nose, a long, weary breath, and I understood the whole of his position from that one breath. He was not angry at me. He was caught between what he knew was right and what had just come down the line to him, and the gap between those two things was exactly the width of his stripes, which is to say, not wide enough to live in comfortably. "Words come down," he said, "through the visitor's office. The controller's deputy, Mr. Slade, has had a complaint from the Lady Coverley's party. The lady's saying she was insulted at the east gate. Refused a reasonable request, spoken to with contempt, left standing in the forecourt while her property was, I'm quoting, abandoned in the open. Slade wants it smoothed. He wants the cases taken up. And he wants," Pell paused, and I saw him dislike the next part before he said it, "he wants you to take them up, personally. As an apology, his word, personally." So there it was. The lever had a name, and the name was Mr. Slade, the controller's deputy, a man I had seen perhaps twice in 11 years and never spoken to, a man whose entire working life was the smoothing of exactly this kind of friction, and who had decided, in the space of a few minutes and on the strength of one party's account, that the simplest road to a quiet evening ran directly over me. "Sergeant," I said, "may I ask, did Mr. Slade ask what I had said, or only what she had said?" Pell's jaw worked. "He asked what would make it stop," he said. "That's the only question that man has ever asked about anything." It was an honest answer, and it told me everything. This was not about the truth of the afternoon. No one above me had the slightest interest in the truth of the afternoon. There was a reception that evening. There was a guest who was upset. There was a deputy whose performance was measured in the absence of complaints. And there was a guard, the cheapest and most expendable piece on the board, who could be made to bend his back and carry 4 cases and turn the whole thing into a non-event by supper time. It was not malice. It was something I had come to find worse than malice, because malice at least knows you are a person it is wronging. This was pure convenience. I was not being wronged. I was being spent. "Sergeant," I said, "you know what carrying those cases now would mean." "I know what it would mean," he said quietly. "I've worn the coat 18 years. I know exactly what it would mean." He looked away at the lime trees, at the long shadows reaching across the forecourt. "It would mean she was right, about all of it, about what you are. You'd be telling every guest who ever drops a bag at a man's boots that the bag gets carried if you make enough noise. You'd be," he stopped and chose the word with care, "you'd be cheapening the gate, for everyone after you. For the lad who stands it when you're gone." "Then you understand," I said, "why I can't." "I understand why you shouldn't," he said. "It's not the same as can't. Can't asterisk you'll have to take up with Mr. Slade because Mr. Slade has just made it an order and I'm the one standing here with the order in my mouth." He met my eyes. "I'm not going to dress it up, Hale. He's told me to tell you to take them up, and I'm telling you. What you do now is yours, but I'd be lying if I said there was no weight on the other side of it. There's weight. He can make your life narrow. He's done it to better men than you and me for crossing him over less. So," he squared his shoulders and his voice went formal, the order coming out clean because that was the only way he could bear to say it. "Corporal Hale, you're instructed by the controller's office to convey the guest's luggage to the east apartments. Will you comply?" I have thought many times since about the moment between his question and my answer. It was not long, a second, perhaps 2, but I lived a good deal in it. I thought about my father at the kitchen table and my grandfather's keys in the ground, and the lad who would stand this gate when I was gone, whoever he would be, and what I would be teaching him with my back if I bent it now. I thought about Slade, whom I had never met, deciding my worth from behind a desk on the word of a stranger. I thought briefly and honestly about how narrow a man like Slade could make a man like me, and whether the principle was worth the narrowing, and I found that it was, not because I am brave, but because I had run out of room to be anything else. There comes a point in a stand where retreat costs more than the holding. I had passed it the moment she said asterisk decoration. "No, Sergeant," I said. "With respect to you, and none at all to the order, I'll not comply. I keep the gate. Carrying a guest's luggage on demand is no part of my post, and being made to do it as a punishment for declining it in the first place is a thing I won't do at any price. If Mr. Slade wishes the cases moved, the porter's lodge is 40 paces that way and they'll do it gladly. If Mr. Slade wishes to discipline me for it, he may send for me and I'll come, and I'll say to his face exactly what I've said to yours. But I'll not pick up those cases." Pell looked at me for a long moment, and then, I will never forget it, something in his face eased, some small private knot came loose, and he gave the smallest nod a man can give and still have it count. "Right," he said. "I'll carry asterisk that up then, word for word." And he turned to go and tell Mr. Slade that the cheapest piece on the board had declined to be spent, which was not, I think, an errand he minded as much as he had minded the first one. But he had not gone 3 steps when the great doors at the top of the forecourt opened again, and Mrs. Honoria Vale came back out, and she was not alone. She had Lady Coverley with her. I knew the lady by sight, a thin, anxious woman who attended every public reception and seemed to take no pleasure in any of them. And she had, walking a half-step ahead of both of them with the brisk proprietary stride of a man arriving to fix something, a tall person in a dark suit whom I had never seen but instantly knew. Mr. Slade had not waited for Pell to bring back my answer. Mr. Slade had decided to come down and apply the lever himself, in person, in front of an audience, which told me a good deal about Mr. Slade, chiefly that he was a man who enjoyed the part of his work that involved standing over people, and had come down not despite the chance of a scene, but because of it. He came across the forecourt and stopped in the open space between me and the great doors, with Mrs. Vale and Lady Coverley arranging themselves behind him, and a small scatter of late visitors and 2 off-duty grooms drifting closer along the edges, drawn by the universal instinct that something was about to happen. Slade looked at the 4 cases. He looked at me. And he smiled, a thin, managed, professional smile, the smile of a man who has decided the matter is already settled and is merely going through the motions of letting me discover it. "You're the sentry," he said, "not a question." "Corporal Hale, sir, East Gate." "Corporal Hale." He let my name sit in his mouth as if filing it. "I'm Slade, the controller's deputy. There seems to have been a misunderstanding, and I've come down to clear it up, because I find these things are always best cleared up quickly before they grow." He spoke pleasantly. That was the worst of it, the pleasantness, the way he addressed me as if we were 2 reasonable men sorting out a clerical error, while everything underneath the words was a hand on the back of my neck. "Mrs. Vale is a valued guest. She arrived, she set down her luggage, she asked for a small courtesy, and she feels, and I'm bound to say it does rather sound this way, that she was treated with discourtesy. Now, the simplest thing, the cleanest thing, is for you to take her cases up to the East Apartments with an apology, and we'll all of us forget the whole business by dinner. Yes. Shall we do that?" He held out a hand toward the cases, palm up, presenting them to me. "There they are, off you go," the gesture of a man so certain of the outcome that he had already moved on to the next item on his afternoon. I did not take the cases. I did not move at all. "Sir," I said, "I'll answer you plainly because I think you'd rather have it plain. I declined to carry the cases, and I directed Mrs. Vale to the porter's lodge, which is the proper place for guests' luggage and 40 paces from where we stand. I'll decline again with respect, for the same reason. It is no part of a guard's post to carry a guest's bags on demand, and I'll not do it. If the lady was spoken to discourteously, I'm sorry for it, and I'd hear the particular words and answer for them. But I said nothing discourteous. I said it wasn't my duty, and I pointed her to the people whose duty it is. That's the whole of my offense, sir, and I'll not enlarge it by carrying the cases now. The pleasantness did not leave Slade's face, but something behind it cooled, the way a room cools when a window opens somewhere out of sight. He had expected the order to do the work. The order had not done the work, and he was a man whose entire authority rested on the assumption that orders from him did the work, that he need only indicate the desired outcome and the lower world would arrange itself accordingly. He was not used to a closed gate, and he did not, I think, have much practice at the thing you do when the lever does not move, which is to say, he did not know how to be refused gracefully, because no one had ever taught him, because no one had ever had to. "I don't think you understand your position," he said, and the pleasantness was thinner now. "I'm not asking you, Corporal. I'm the controller's deputy. I'm instructing you. There's a chain, and I'm a good deal further up it than you are, and when I instruct a sentry to do a thing, the sentry does it. That's how the household runs. That's how it has always run. So I'll say it once more clearly, and I'd advise you to hear it. Pick up the cases." Behind him, Mrs. Vale's face had begun to do something I had been waiting for without quite knowing it. When she came out, she had worn the look of a woman bringing the cavalry, vindicated, triumphant. Now we shall see. But as Slade pressed and I did not move, a small uncertainty had started to work at the edges of that look, a first faint crack, because she had expected the cavalry to roll straight over me, and instead the cavalry had stopped and was arguing, and the longer it argued the more it began to look not like a great power crushing a small obstacle but like two men disagreeing about a principle, which was a frame in which she did not, she was beginning to sense, come off so well. "Sir," I said, "I hear you clearly, and I'll be just as clear. There is a chain, and you're far up it, and I honor it. I've honored it 11 years, and I'd honor a lawful order from you the instant you gave one. But this isn't a lawful order. There's no standing instruction, no regulation, no command in the whole of the guard's book that says a sentry carries a guest's luggage at a deputy's word. You can instruct me to leave my post, and I'll know I must refuse it. You can instruct me to bow to a guest, and I'll know I must refuse that too. The chain runs on the regulations. It doesn't run on whatever a man at the top of it happens to want at 4 in the afternoon. If it did, sir, it wouldn't be worth a single one of the men standing in it. So no, I'll not pick up the cases. And I'll tell you with respect that the more you press it in front of these people, the worse a thing you're asking me to do, because now you're not asking me to carry a bag, you're asking me to be broken in public, and I'll not be that for any man living." I had not raised my voice once. I want that on the record because it is the whole secret of the thing, and I learned it from older men and have tried to pass it to younger ones, and it is the closest thing to a creed the work has given me. The power is not in the volume. The power is in the asterisk restraint. A man who shouts has already conceded that he might not be obeyed. The shout is the sound of authority leaking. The man who stays level, who answers a raised pressure with a lowered, steadier voice, is the man who has not conceded anything, and everyone within earshot feels it, even if they could not say why. Slade was pressing harder and harder, and with each press he sounded a little less in command, and with each level word I sounded a little more, and the watching faces along the edge of the forecourt were beginning to read the scene correctly. Not deputy disciplines insolent sentry, asterisk, but important man cannot make calm man do a thing the calm man knows he oughtn't. Slade felt it too. I watched him feel it. And men like Slade, when they feel their authority leaking, do not lower their voices. They reach for the heaviest thing within reach and bring it down. "Very well," he said, and the pleasantness was entirely gone now, replaced by something flat and final. "I see what you are. I had hoped to settle this quietly. You've chosen otherwise in front of guests, in front of the household. You've chosen to make a performance of your defiance, and you'll answer for the performance, not the bags. I'm relieving you of this post. Now, you'll consider yourself suspended from gate duty pending a hearing, and you'll account for your conduct to me and to the controller, and I'll tell you frankly, Corporal, That in 18 years no sentry who has stood where you're standing and spoken to me as you've spoken to me has kept his place at this palace. Hand off your post. There are men who will be glad of it. It was the hammer. He had reached for the heaviest thing, my place, my living, the gate itself, and brought it down in front of everyone. And for a moment a real silence opened on the forecourt, the held-breath silence of bystanders watching a man's life get knocked sideways. Here is the thing I had to decide in that silence, and it was harder than the bags, harder than the order, harder than anything that had come before. A man cannot abandon his post. That is not pride. It is the oldest law of the work, older than any deputy, older than the household itself. A sentry holds his post until he is properly relieved by the guard, through the guard's own chain, by a relief detailed and marched up and handed the post man to man. The controller's deputy is not in that chain. Mr. Slade, for all his suit and his stripes by another name, had no more lawful power to relieve me of my post than Mrs. Vale had to make me carry her cases. He could say the words. He could not make them true. And if I walked off the east gate now because a civilian deputy had told me to, if I left it unmanned, or worse, let him set men who'll be glad of it upon it without a proper relief, then I would have abandoned my post, and I would deserve every consequence that fell, and the whole stand would have been not a stand but a tantrum that ended in dereliction. So I did the hardest thing of the whole long afternoon, which was to refuse even that, the order that wore the most rightful-looking coat of all. "Sir," I said very quietly, so quietly that the watchers leaned in to catch it, "I can't be relieved by you. I mean no insolence by it. I mean the plain fact of the work. A sentry's post is held until the guard relieves him through the guard's own chain by a relief properly detailed and marched up. You're the controller's deputy. You're not in that chain. If I walked off this gate at your word, I'd be abandoning my post, and that's the one thing in the whole of the regulations that would truly cost me my place, and rightly so. So I'll not do that either. I'll stand my post until my own sergeant or an officer of the guard relieves me as the regulations require. If they relieve me to face a hearing, I'll go to the hearing with a clear conscience and I'll answer every word. But I'll not leave the east gate because a man who isn't in my chain has told me to. With respect, sir, I keep the gate." And I looked at Sergeant Pell, who had stood through all of it 3 paces off, white about the mouth, and I saw him understand precisely what I had just done, that I had not defied the chain but appealed to it, that I had not refused authority but insisted, against the man waving the most authority around, that there was real one, with rules that bound us both. And I saw Pell straighten, because now the question had come to him, the only man on that forecourt who actually held a thread of the chain that mattered, and he had to decide, in front of the deputy, whose side of the line he stood on. Slade rounded on him, "Sergeant, relieve this man." Pell did not move. "On what grounds, sir?" His voice was steady. He stated the regulation correctly. "I can't relieve a sentry for refusing an unlawful order, and carrying luggage isn't a lawful order, and you relieving him isn't a relief. If you want him off that gate, sir, it'll have to go up through the guard to the captain of the watch or higher. I'll carry the report up myself this minute and gladly, but I'll not pull a good man off his post on an order I know to be wrong. That's my place, sir, and I keep it the same as he keeps his." It was the bravest thing I ever heard another man do for me, and he did it in 11 words about grounds, and I have never since heard the word grounds without thinking of Sergeant Pell standing white-faced on the cobbles refusing to break me. Slade looked from Pell to me and back, and I watched the calculation move behind his eyes, the slow, unwelcome arithmetic of a man discovering that the lever he was so sure of had jammed against the one thing he had not accounted for, which was that the people he meant to use as the lever had their own rules, and the rules did not bend the way he did. He had a choice now. He could let it go, call it a misunderstanding, walk back inside, write the afternoon off. Or he could take it higher, up the real chain he had been pretending he stood above, and risked discovering that the chain did not agree with him. He chose to take it higher, and that, God help him, though he did not know it, was the worst choice he could possibly have made. "Then we'll go higher," Slade said, very cold, "and we'll see how your asterisk grounds hold up when the matter's in front of someone who outranks the both of you and has no patience for barrack-room lawyering. Stay where you are, Corporal. Don't imagine this is finished. It's only just begun." And he turned, and he gathered Mrs. Vale and Lady Coverley with a look, and he went back up the forecourt toward the great doors and the household beyond them, to find someone large enough to settle the matter, never once suspecting where, in a palace, the chain he was climbing actually ended. When the great doors had swallowed them, Pell let out a breath and came and stood beside me, shoulder to shoulder, both of us facing the gate as the regulations require, which is a thing two men can do when they need to speak without seeming to. "Well," he said low, "you've done it now." "I have," I agreed. "He'll go to the controller. The comptroller'll not want a scene either. He'll likely back his own man to make it go away. They'll have your hearing by the end of the week, and they'll find some quiet reason, and you'll be at a lodge gate in the outer park counting carts by Michaelmas, if you're lucky, and dismissed if you're not." He said it without heat, the way a man lays out weather. "You know that." "I know that's how it usually runs," I said. "It's how it always runs," he said. "I've watched it run that way 8-10 times. A guest's upset, a deputy's embarrassed, a guard's expendable. The truth doesn't come into it. There's nobody at the top of that chain who will ever hear your side, Edmund. That's the cruelty of it. You're right, and being right won't reach the people who decide." He paused. "So I'll ask you man to man, and you can tell me to mind my own, was it worth it? 4 cases and a rude woman. Against the gate you've stood 11 years and the trade you've nothing else to live by. Was it worth it?" I thought about how to answer him honestly, because Pell had earned honesty, and because the question was the right one. The only question, really, that the whole afternoon came down to. "My grandfather kept this gate," I said. 31 years. They buried his keys with him. My father told me a thing he'd said, the night before I took the oath, that the grand ones would always try to make me small, because it cost them nothing and made them feel large, and that I couldn't stop them trying, but I could decide every time whether they won. That the one thing they couldn't take, unless I handed it over, was that. Just that. I let the lime shadows move across the cobbles a moment. "I've handed over a great deal in 11 years, Pell. I've handed over my Sundays and my Christmases and the top of my hearing on the parade ground and 2 stone of the man I was at 20. I've stood in the rain till I couldn't feel my hands and never moved, because the moving was the giving up. I've let 1,000 people walk past me as if I were a coat hook, and never let it touch the inside of me. And I find I've nothing left I'm willing to hand over, not the last thing. If keeping the gate costs me the gate, then it costs me the gate, but I'll keep it the way it ought to be kept on the way out, or there was never any point in keeping it at all. So yes, it was worth it. It's the only thing left that is asterisk worth it." Pell was quiet a while. Then he said, "Your grandfather'd be proud," which is the kind of thing men say to each other when they cannot find anything truer, and it was true enough, and I let it stand. And that, I think, is the moment I had made my peace with losing, genuinely made it, all the way down, no part of me still bargaining. And it is exactly the moment, as such moments so often are, that the whole shape of the afternoon began, without my knowing it yet, to turn. Because what neither I nor Pell nor Slade nor Mrs. Vale knew, standing on that forecourt arguing about whether the truth could reach the top of the chain, was that the top of the chain had been on the forecourt the entire time. I should explain the east gate and why this matters. The east gate gives onto the lower forecourt, but the lower forecourt is overlooked, along its northern edge, by the windows of the old schoolroom wing, the rooms where, in the present reign, the young royals took their lessons and their afternoons. Princess Malin, who was then about 8, and her brother Prince Joran, about 10, kept their schoolroom in that wing, and the schoolroom's tall windows looked straight down upon my post, and the children, being children, spent a good deal of their permitted idle time at those windows, watching the gate, watching the visitors, watching, I have no doubt, the unmoving man in the red tunic whom they had been told 100 times not to wave at, and could not always help waving at. They had been at the windows the whole afternoon. They had seen the lady drop her bags. They had seen me decline. They had seen the sergeant come and the deputy come, and the deputy raise his voice and threaten the gate, and the sergeant refuse to break me. They had seen all of it from above in pantomime, the way you watch a thing through glass. And one of them, the smaller one, the Princess Malin, had not stayed at the window. She had gone to find her mother. And her mother was the queen. I did not know any of this at the time. At the time, I knew only what was in front of me. An empty forecourt, lengthening shadows, 4 cases still sitting at my boots, a sergeant beside me who had risked his stripes to stand with me, and the certain knowledge that somewhere inside the great doors a deputy was assembling a case that would, in the ordinary run of things, end my service. I went back to standing my post. There was nothing else to do, and the post does not stop needing to be stood because a man's life is being decided indoors. So I stood it, eyes forward, level with the far stone. The work does not care about your troubles. That is one of the kindnesses of the work, though it does not feel like a kindness while you are inside it. It gives you something to do with your body while your life is being argued over by strangers. A quarter of an hour passed. Then Pell was called inside, summoned by a runner from the visitor's office, off to give his account, and he went with a backward glance at me that said, "Hold the line. I'll tell it straight." And then I was alone at the gate as the afternoon tipped over toward evening. It was in that hour alone that the false dawn came, though I did not recognize it for what it was until much later, when I understood the whole shape of the day. A man came down from the household, not Slade. An older man, soft-footed, beautifully dressed, with the smooth gray courtesy of someone who has spent 40 years smoothing things in great houses. The mistress of the robe's own undersecretary, I learned afterward, a fixer of the very highest grade, the man you send when Slade has made a mess, and the mess needs to be made to vanish before it reaches anyone who matters. He came and stood with me at the gate, companionably, as if we were old friends, and he talked. He was very good, I'll give him that. He did not order me. He did not threaten me. He had clearly heard that ordering and threatening had only stiffened my back, and he had come with the opposite tool, which is so much more dangerous. He came to be reasonable. "Corporal Hale," he said warmly, "what a tangle. What an absolute tangle, and all over nothing, over a few cases, over a tired lady's bad manners on a warm day. You've been quite right, you know, quite right. Between you and me, the lady behaved abominably, and Slade made it 10 times worse charging down here like a bull. He always does. It's his great failing. You needn't have carried those cases, and you were right not to. I want you to know I see that clearly." He let it land, the relief of being seen, after an afternoon of not being, and then, gently, he turned it. "Which is exactly why I've come down myself. Because you're right, and being right, you stand to lose everything, and that would be a tragedy, and I'd like to spare you it. Here's how. The lady will have her cases up by a porter properly, not by you. You'll not touch them. And you'll let me take you quietly to Mrs. Vale just for a moment, and you'll say a few warm words. Not an apology, nothing so crude. Just that you regret any asterisk distress, that's all. That you regret she was distressed, and the whole thing dissolves. No hearing, no controller, no mark on your record. You keep your gait, the lady keeps her dignity, Slade keeps his pride, everyone goes home. A few words about distress. That's the whole price. Surely that's a price a sensible man pays gladly to keep 11 years and his living and his good name. And I will be honest with you, because I have been honest with you all the way through, and I'll not stop now. I was tempted. It was the most tempting thing anyone said to me all day, more tempting by far than the bags or the orders, because it asked for so little and gave back so much, and because it came wrapped in the one thing I had been starved of all afternoon, which was the acknowledgement that I was right. You were right. Now here is how a right man keeps what he's earned. It is a beautiful trap. It is the reasonable middle, the sensible compromise, the small bend that costs almost nothing and saves almost everything. And it is exactly, precisely, the most dangerous thing a man of principle is ever offered, more dangerous than any threat. Because a threat hardens you and a kindness softens you, and they were trying to soften me into doing, by the front door, the very thing I had refused at every back one. Because I regret your distress sounds like nothing, but it is not nothing. It is the apology with the apology's name filed off. To say it to Mrs. Vale in front of her, brought to her by a fixer for the express purpose of dissolving her complaint, was to say, "You were wronged, and I am the one who wronged you, and I have been brought to heel to tell you so." It would close the loop she had wanted closed from the moment the cases hit my boots. It would tell her and Slade and everyone who heard of it that the gate could be made to bend after all, not by an order which I had beaten, but by a kindness, which is how they get the men the orders can't. And I would have handed over the last thing, the only thing, the thing my grandfather said no one could take unless I gave it, and I would have given it for a record kept clean and a gate kept warm, and I would have known, every cold morning I stood that gate thereafter, exactly what I had traded for the standing of it. "Sir," I said, "that's the kindest offer I've had today, and I believe you mean it kindly, and I thank you for it, but I'll not say it, not even those few words, because they're not few, they only look few. I did the lady no wrong, and to tell her I regret her distress is to take a wrong I never did and wear it so the household needn't be troubled, and that's a heavier thing to carry than 4 cases ever were. I'll keep my gate if I'm let. And if keeping it the right way means I'm not let, then I'll lose it the right way, and that's an end of it. But I'll not buy it back with a sentence that turns my standing into a kneeling. I'm sorry, sir, truly. The answer's still no." The warmth went out of the gray man like heat out of a stone at sundown. He looked at me a moment with something almost like regret, real regret, I think. The regret of a craftsman whose finest tool has failed on the one job that needed it, and he said quietly, "You're a very stubborn man, Corporal," and it was not a compliment, and it was not quite an insult either. It was a verdict. "I'm a man at his post, sir," I said. "It's all I've ever been." He nodded slowly. "Then I can't help you," he said. "You understand that. I came down to save you, and you won't be saved. And now it goes up all the way up, because Slade's already taken it there, and there's no one left between you and the top of the house. I'd hoped to catch it before it got that high. It's too late now." He shook his head, almost to himself, and turned to go, and at the arch he paused and looked back, and said the thing that I carried in my chest like a cold stone for the next half hour. "I hope your principle keeps you warm, Corporal. Because by this time tomorrow, I rather think it's all you'll have left." And he was gone, and the forecourt was empty, and the light was going gold and long across the cobbles, and I stood my gate with 4 cases at my boots and believed, truly believed in that hour, that I had just talked myself, deliberately and with my eyes open, out of my own life. That was the false dawn. The moment the easy salvation was held out and I refused it, and was left, as far as I could see, with nothing. The summons came as the light failed. It did not come the way I expected. I had braced for the worst version, Slade returning in triumph with some senior officer of the controller's household, a formal relief, a cold escort indoors to a room where men with no knowledge of me would decide my future on a deputy's account of a quarrel they had not seen. That is how it would have gone in the ordinary run of things. That is how Pell had said it always goes. Instead, what came across the forecourt in the last of the gold light was Captain Arden of the watch, my own captain, the proper head of my own chain, the man with the only lawful power to relieve me, and he was walking fast, and his face was a thing I had never seen on it in 11 years of serving under him. Captain Arden was a hard man, a fair man, a man who had broken sergeants for slackness, and once stood 3 days without sleep through a flood that nearly took the lower park, And in all that time I had seen him angry, and I had seen him grim, and I had seen him, once, weep at a comrade's graveside before he caught himself. I had never seen him afraid. He was not afraid now either. But there was something in his face close to it, a high, taut, careful alertness, the look of a man walking a beam over a long drop, the look of a man who knows that the next quarter hour matters more than the last 11 years and means not to put a foot wrong. He came up to me, and he stopped, and he did a thing he had never once done to me before. He looked me up and down, boots, belt, buttons, bearskin, the line of me, the way you check a man before he goes somewhere that matters. An inspection. A swift, total soldier's inspection. "Hale," he said, "tell me fast and plain exactly what happened, from the first. Leave nothing out and put nothing in. I need the truth, and I need it in 2 minutes, and then I need you to come with me, and I'll tell you why when you've told me what." So I told him, fast and plain as he'd asked, the way I'd told Pell the cases, the order, the asterisk decoration asterisk, the do you know who I am asterisk, the staff entrance, the porter's lodge, Slade, the threat to the gate, the unlawful relief I had refused, Pell's asterisk grounds, the gray man and his sentence about distress and my refusing even that. I left nothing out and I put nothing in. It took less than the 2 minutes. Captain Arden listened without moving, his eyes on mine, and when I had finished, he was quiet for one breath, and then he said something I did not understand until everything that followed had happened. "Good," he said, "just that, good, and then, you did right. You did exactly right at every step, including the steps that are about to cost a great many people a very bad evening, though not, I think, you. Now listen to me, Corporal, and listen close, because what's about to happen has never happened to you and you'll want to be ready for it." He drew a breath. "You're to come with me, up to the house. Now. The matter's been taken all the way to the top." Slade saw to that, the fool. He took it as high as it goes, thinking the height would be on his side. "And the person at the top has asked to see the sentry from the east gate. By name. The whole name. The corporal who would not carry the cases." Something moved at the corner of his mouth, the ghost of a thing that was not quite a smile and not quite anything else. "I'm to relieve you properly." A relief's marched up behind me. "Look, there's Corbett coming now to take the gate. All by the book, you'll hand it off man to man as it ought to be done. And then you'll come with me. And Hale," he held my eye, "whatever happens in that room, you stand the way you stood out here. Level. Plain. The truth and nothing dressed on it. Can you do that?" "Sir," I said, and my voice was steadier than I was. "Who's asked to see me?" And Captain Arden told me, and the forecourt seemed to go very quiet and very far away, and the 4 honey-colored cases at my boots became, in that instant, the smallest and most foolish things in the entire world. "The Queen," he said, "Her Majesty has sent for you herself, and I'd not keep her waiting, Corporal, not even to count to 10. I had stood the east gate of Harrowgate Palace for 11 years, and I had never once been inside the house proper. That is not unusual. A gate sentry's whole life is the threshold, and the rooms beyond it are a country he guards the border of and never visits. So I will tell you that walking up that forecourt at Captain Arden's side, through the great doors I had watched 100,000 people pass through, into the cool stone hush of the visitors' hall, and then past it deeper, through doors that needed a word from the captain to open, and then a word from men beyond them. I will tell you that I had never in my life felt so much like a thing in the wrong place. The corridors went on. There were paintings the size of barn doors and floors you could have shaved in, and a silence with carpet under it. And at the end of all of it, a tall white door with 2 of my own guard standing it. Men I knew, Harker and Voss, who came to attention as we approached and looked at me as I passed with an expression I could not read and have thought about ever since. And then the door and the room. It was not a throne room. I had half expected a throne room, some great cold hall of state. It was a sitting room, warm, lamplit, large but lived in, with long windows giving onto the dusk, and a fire laid though not yet lit, and the comfortable disorder of a room where a family actually spent its evenings. There were books left open. There was a child's drawing pinned, with no ceremony at all, to the edge of a gilt frame worth more than my street. And there were people in it, and I took them in the way you take in a room you may have to account for later, all at once and in order of danger. Slade was there by the window, and the triumph had gone out of him. He stood like a man who has climbed a long ladder to deliver an important message, and arrived to find the message was about himself. The gray undersecretary was there, by the wall, very still, his face composed into the perfect blankness of a man trying to be furniture, which I noted with some private justice. Mrs. Vale was there, seated, and Lady Coverley beside her, and Mrs. Vale's face when she saw me come in did a complicated thing. A flinch, a hardening, and underneath both, beginning, the first true uncertainty I had seen on her all day, because a woman who has lodged a complaint expecting it to be quietly granted does not expect to find herself summoned to the Queen's own sitting room to watch it examined. And by the unlit fire, in a plain chair, in a plain dark dress, with no crown and no ceremony and nothing about her that announced itself, sat a woman I knew at once though I had never been within 100 yards of her, because the whole room was bent toward her the way iron bends toward a lodestone, without being told to, without seeming to. Queen Saralind. She was perhaps 50. She had a calm, plain, watchful face, the face of a woman who has spent a lifetime learning to see what is actually in front of her rather than what is being performed for her. And her eyes came to me as I entered and stayed there, steady, unhurried, taking my measure with exactly the kind of attention I had spent 11 years failing to receive from the people who dropped their bags at my boots. And standing close beside her chair, half behind it, with one hand on its arm and her chin up and her eyes very bright and fixed on me with the fierce loyalty of the very young, was a small girl in a blue dress. The Princess Malin, the child from the window. I did not know yet that she was the reason I was in that room. But she was looking at me the way you look at someone you have already decided to defend, and I will remember that look until I die. Captain Arden halted me at the proper distance, and came to attention, and announced me, Corporal Edmund Hale, East Gate, Your Majesty, and stepped back, and left me standing alone in the middle of that warm, bright room with the whole afternoon arranged in front of me in the persons of the people who had lived it. The Queen looked at me for a moment longer. Then she spoke, and her voice was quiet and even and carried without the smallest effort, the voice of a person who has never in her life needed to raise it to be obeyed. Corporal Hale, she said, thank you for coming. I'm sorry to have taken you from your post. Captain Arden assures me it's properly relieved, so your conscience may rest on that score. A small dryness there that told me she already knew a good deal, that she knew enough to know that the relief of my post was a thing I would care about, and the knowing of it was its own quiet message. I've been hearing a great many accounts of this afternoon. Mr. Slade has given me his. Mrs. Vale has given me hers. Lady Coverley has been so good as to add her own. A pause. I find they agree on the events and disagree entirely on their meaning, which is usually the case, and which usually means the meaning is the only thing worth examining. So I should like to hear yours. Not the events, I have the events. I should like to hear what you thought you were doing. Tell me plainly. You needn't be afraid. No one in this room outranks the truth, including me. And so, for the third time that day, I told it plain. But it was different this time because she was different, because for the first time all day I was telling it to someone who was actually listening, weighing each word as it came, and a strange thing happens to the truth when it is heard properly. It comes out cleaner, with less defense around it because it does not need the defense. I told her of the cases and the order. I told her when she asked, and she did ask, gently exactly what words had passed, and I gave them to her exactly, including asterisk decoration, including asterisk do you know who I am, including my own answers, asterisk not my duty, ma'am. I keep the gate, and I watched her take each one and set it where it belonged. I told her of Slade and the unlawful order and the threat to my post, and of why I could not be relieved by a man not in my chain. And at that her eyes moved, just once, to Captain Arden, and something passed between them that I think was approval. I told her of the gray man and his offer, just say you regret her distress, and of why I had refused even that. And here, for the first time, my plain account faltered because I had to say aloud, to the Queen, the thing my grandfather had said, and a man's voice does not always hold steady when he says the truest thing he owns. Your Majesty, I said, I was taught by my father who was taught by his, who kept this same gate 31 years, that the grand ones will always try to make a man at his post feel small, because it costs them nothing and warms them, and that a man cannot stop them trying, but he can decide, every time, whether they succeed. That it's the one thing they can't take unless he hands it over. I've handed over a great deal to this gate, ma'am, gladly. I found this afternoon that I'd nothing left I was willing to hand over. That's all I was doing. I wasn't defying anyone. I was keeping the one thing that was mine to keep. I'm sorry if the keeping of it has caused your Majesty's house any trouble, but I'd keep it again. The room was very quiet. And then a small, fierce voice broke the quiet. The Princess Malin, unable to hold it any longer, the words bursting out of her the way truth bursts out of children before they have learned to be afraid of it. He told the truth, Mama. I saw all of it from the schoolroom. He never shouted, not once, even when the man shouted at him. The lady dropped her bags right on his feet and walked away, and he just stood there like he does, all proper. And he told her the nice way where the porters are, and she was horrid to him. And then the cross man came and was horrider, and he still didn't shout, and I thought it wasn't fair, Mama, that everyone was being so unkind to the man who guards us, and he was being so good and nobody was helping him, so I came to find you. Because you always say if a thing isn't fair and you can help, you must. She ran out of breath and went pink and finished, very small, so I did. The Queen reached up without looking and laid her hand over her daughter's small hand on the arm of the chair, and pressed it, and said, You did exactly right. Malin and the child stood a little taller, and I understood at last why I was in that room. Not because Slade had carried his complaint to the top. Slade had carried it to the controller, and the controller, no doubt, would have buried it as deputies' messes are always buried. I was in that room because an 8-year-old had stood at a window and seen an unfairness and gone, on her own small legs, to find the one person in the kingdom who could mend it, and had been believed. The chain Slade climbed had not delivered me here, the child had. And there is a justice in that I have never stopped being moved by, that all of Mrs. Vale's names and all of Slade's stripes had failed to reach the top of the house, and a little girl's sense that a thing wasn't fair had walked straight up to it without a single obstacle. Queen Saralind was silent a moment. Then she turned her steady gaze on Mrs. Vale, and she did not raise her voice, and she did not need to. Mrs. Vale, she said, you came to my house as a guest and a guest of a guest, and you were welcome. Will you tell me, in your own words, I shan't trap you, what it was you wanted from my sentry this afternoon? Mrs. Vale's mouth opened, and for the first time all day no ready words came out of it. I watched her reach for the shape of the thing she had been so sure of on the forecourt, a simple courtesy, a small request anyone would have. And I watched the shape fail to form, because there is a great difference between saying you take these asterisks to a man you have decided is furniture, and explaining to the Queen in the Queen's sitting room with the Queen's calm eyes upon you, what exactly you believed entitled you to it. The first is easy. The second cannot be done. There is no version of I expected him to carry my bags, because I assumed a man in a uniform, was a servant, I could command that survives being said aloud to a sovereign. The entitlement had been invisible to her all afternoon precisely, because she had never once had to put it into words in front of someone who would weigh them. Now she did, and the words were not there, and the absence of them was the most eloquent thing in the room. Your Majesty, I was tired," she managed at last. "I had traveled. I suppose I assumed." "You assumed he was yours to command," the Queen said, not cruelly, almost gently. The gentleness was the worst of it, the way it left nowhere to hide. "You looked at a man at his post and you did not see a man. You saw a convenience. I don't say this to shame you, Mrs. Vale, though I think a little shame would not be wasted. I say it because it is precisely what he refused to let you do, and precisely why he was right to refuse it, and precisely why I have brought you here to understand it, rather than having my undersecretary make the unpleasantness disappear, which I'm told is what was attempted." Her eyes moved briefly to the gray man by the wall, who became, if possible, even more like furniture. "That man at my gate is not decoration. He is the discipline that lets my children sleep. The stillness you mistook for emptiness this afternoon is the single hardest thing I ask of anyone in my service, and he gives it to me without complaint in the rain and the cold and the heat, year upon year. And when you dropped your bags on his feet and walked away, you were not inconveniencing a servant. You were testing a soldier, and he passed your test, Mrs. Vale, with more grace than you showed in setting it. He even pointed you to the people who would have carried your cases gladly and well. You declined that. You preferred to be wronged. I'm afraid I can't help you to a wrong that wasn't done." Mrs. Vale had gone very white, and then, slowly, a deep and painful red, and she looked at the floor. And for a moment I almost pitied her, because there is no lonelier place in the world than the center of a room where you have just been shown, kindly and completely, the size of your own smallness. She had come up the drive that afternoon certain that the world was arranged for her convenience and that she could tell furniture from people at a glance. She was leaving it having learned, in front of the highest person she would ever meet, that she had got it exactly backward, that the man she had treated as a thing was the one with honor to spare, and that she, with all her names, had been the small one all along. "I should like," the Queen said, "to hear you say one thing to Corporal Hale before you go. Not an apology I've extracted, those are worth nothing, and I'll not embarrass either of you by squeezing one out. Only this, I should like you to look at him, at his face, which I don't believe you've done once today. Will you do that?" And Mrs. Vale lifted her eyes, and for the first time since she had come up the drive, she looked at me, really looked at my face, at the man. And I looked back at her level, the way I had looked at the far stone all afternoon, with no triumph in it, because there was no triumph in me. There was only the long tiredness of a man who has held a thing all day and is only now allowed to set it down. And whatever she saw in my face, I cannot tell you what it was. I was not performing anything, it undid the last of her. Her chin trembled, and she said low the only words she ever said to me that were her own and not her station's. "I'm sorry I didn't see you. I'm sorry." "It's all right, ma'am," I said, because it was now, and because cruelty in victory is its own kind of losing, and my grandfather had not taught me to win in order to teach me to gloat. "The porters'll have your cases up before you reach the apartments. They'll have done it well. I hope you have a good evening." And that, I think, undid her more than anything the Queen had said, that I wished her a good evening plainly and meant it, because she put her hand over her mouth and turned away, and Lady Coverley rose and took her arm, and the Queen nodded them quietly out, and they went, and I never saw Mrs. Honoria Vale again. I have wondered sometimes whether the afternoon changed her, or whether she went back down the drive and was furniture blind again by Christmas. I'll never know. It is not really my business. My business was the gate, and I had kept it. But the Queen was not finished, and her gaze, when the door had closed on Mrs. Vale, came to rest on Mr. Slade, and it was not gentle now. "Mrs. Vale was tired and forgot her manners," she said. "That is a small thing and a human one, and I've forgiven larger. You, Mr. Slade, are another matter. You are not a tired guest. You are an officer of my household. You hold your position so that the small frictions of a great house may be smoothed before they trouble anyone. And instead, this afternoon, you took a small friction and you ground it into a man until it nearly cost him his service. And you did it not because you believed him wrong, but because you found it inconvenient that he was right. You ordered a sentry off his post, a thing you have no power to do, as both he and his sergeant had to teach you, to your evident surprise. You attempted to relieve a guard through your own authority, which does not extend to my guard and never has. And when that failed, you carried the matter up to me, expecting, I think, that I would see a deputy and a guest on one side and a sentry on the other, and decide the way you imagined I always decide. She let that sit. You misjudged me rather badly, Mr. Slade. I came up through this house at the side of a mother who taught me that you can measure the whole worth of a great person by exactly one thing: how they treat the people they could safely treat badly. You could have treated Corporal Hale as badly as you liked this afternoon, and, in the ordinary run of things, paid nothing for it. That is precisely why how you treated him tells me everything I need to know about whether you are fit to hold authority in my name. And you are not. Slade had gone the color of old paper. Your Majesty. You'll keep your position, the Queen said, for now, because I don't dismiss men in anger and I'll review it cool. But you will understand it differently from this evening. Your office exists to protect the people of this house, all of them, the porters and the sentries and the kitchen staff quite as much as the guests with names, from exactly the kind of afternoon you yourself manufactured today. You forgot that. You'll not forget it again. And the first thing you will do, before you sleep, is find Sergeant Pell, who stood by his man when standing by him was dangerous, and you will tell him that he was right and you were wrong in those words, and you will thank him for it. Because a household where the sergeants are braver than the deputies is a household with its honor in the wrong place, and I mean to put mine back where it belongs. Do you understand me, Mr. Slade? Yes, Your Majesty, Slade said, very low, and there was no triumph left anywhere in him, and the gray undersecretary by the wall had achieved at last a stillness that nearly rivaled my own, the stillness of a man devoutly hoping not to be addressed. Then go, the Queen said, and begin with the sergeant. And Slade went, and the gray man went after him, and the warm, bright room was suddenly very much emptier, and held now only the Queen, and the child, and Captain Arden and me. The Queen sat back in her plain chair and looked at me for a long moment, and the hardness went out of her face, and what came into it was something I had not been looked at with in a very long time, perhaps not since my father died. A plain, warm, unguarded respect, given freely, with nothing wanted back. Corporal Hale, she said, I'm going to tell you something, and then I'm going to let you go back to your evening, because you've had a longer afternoon than any man should. You believe, I think I heard it in you, that you nearly lost everything today, and that you only didn't because a child happened to be at a window. And it's true that I'd not have known but for Malin. But understand me, the having known is the smallest part of it. You did not keep your honor this afternoon because I was watching. You kept it when you were certain no one who mattered was watching at all, when my undersecretary told you, in so many words, that your principal would be all you had left by morning, and you held it anyway. That is the only kind of honor that is worth anything, the kind that holds in the dark when it cannot possibly pay. You had no reason to believe it would be rewarded. You had every reason to believe it would be punished. And you kept it for its own sake because it was yours and you would not hand it over. Men like you are the reason a crown means anything at all. The crown is only metal. You are what it stands for. She paused. Your grandfather kept this gate 31 years. I should like you to keep it a good while longer if you're willing, and I should like, when the time comes, for whatever lad stands it after you to be told why it's a post worth keeping properly. I'll see that he is. That's a promise from me to you, and I don't make many. I could not speak for a moment. When I could, all I had was the plain thing, which was the only thing I have ever had. Thank you, Your Majesty, I said. I'll keep the gate. I know you will, she said. It's why I'm not the least bit worried about it. And then, with the smallest smile, the first I had seen on her, Malin, have you something to say to the corporal? The child came out from behind the chair and crossed the room to me, and stopped, and looked up a long way up, At the man in the red tunic she had watched from the schoolroom window for as long as she could remember, and who she had, that afternoon, gone to war for in the only way an 8-year-old can. "Thank you for guarding us," she said very seriously, as if it were the most important sentence she would ever say, "and I'm sorry they were unkind. When I'm grown up I shan't ever drop my bags on anybody's feet. I promise." And I, who had not bent all day, who had stood through orders and threats and the kindest trap of all without giving an inch, I bent then. I went down on one knee on the Queen's carpet slowly, the way I had been trained to do nothing of the sort, so that my eyes were level with the child's, and I said, "That's the finest promise anyone's made me in 11 years, Princess, and I'll tell you a secret about the gate since you watched it so well today." She leaned in, eyes huge. "The gate isn't the stone and it isn't the man. It's the keeping. As long as somebody keeps it properly, it holds. You kept it properly today from the schoolroom window better than I did from the forecourt. You saw a thing that wasn't fair and you didn't look away. That's the whole of it. That's the whole of guarding anything. Don't you ever lose it." She nodded, fierce and solemn, and I rose, and I came to attention, and Captain Arden marched me out. But at the door I looked back, and the Queen was watching me go with her hand on her daughter's shoulder, and she gave me a single small nod, sovereign to sentry, that I have carried at my post every day since and will carry into the ground the way they carried my grandfather's keys. They marched me back down through the great house and the long corridors and the cool stone hush, out through the doors I had guarded for 11 years from the outside, and now, for the first and only time, passed through from within, and onto the forecourt under a sky gone deep blue with the first stars in it. The 4 honey-colored cases were gone, carried up, I learned, by the porters within the hour properly, by men trained for the leather, exactly as I had said from the first. Corbett stood my gate in the lamplight, and he saw me coming, and he straightened, and there was a thing in his young face I had not put there and could not have, because I had not known until that afternoon that it was being made. Pride, not in himself, in the post, in the gate, in the thing he had heard already, for a palace is a village and the word had already run round it, that the East Gate sentry had stood all day against a deputy, and a guest and a fixer, and never carried the cases, and had been sent for by the Queen herself, and had come back still in his red coat with his honor whole. "Corporal," he said, and saluted, and it was not regulation to salute a corporal, and I let it stand, because I understood it was not really for me. "Corbett," I said, "anything to report?" "Quiet gate, Corporal," he said, fighting a grin. "Nobody's dropped a single bag." I relieved him properly, man to man, by the book, the way it ought to be done and the way it had not been done all day until my own captain came to do it right. And then I took up my post at the east gate of Harrowgate Palace in the deep blue evening, with the stars coming out over the lime trees and the lamps gold on the old cobbles, and I stood it. I want to end where I began, because a gate is a circle, and so, I have found, is a life worth living. I told you at the start that the world divides into people who see a man in a red tunic and people who see a fixture, and that the rarest thing the guard ever asks is to be addressed as furniture and remain, in your own mind, a man. That is still true. It will always be true. There will be another Mrs. Vale next week, and another Slade next year, and the small bottomless human certainty that the still man has no inside will outlast me and the lad after me and the lad after him. I cannot stop them trying. My grandfather knew it. He told my father. My father told me at the kitchen table with his cold tea. And one day, the Queen has promised, someone will tell whatever boy stands this gate when I am gone. But here is the thing I learned on the longest afternoon of my service, the thing I had been taught my whole life and never truly known until it cost me something to know it. They cannot win unless you hand it over. The bags are never the bags. The order is never the order. Every one of them is the same single question, set down at your boots in different clothes. Will you let me make you small? And the answer is always only, entirely yours. They own the coats and the carriages and the names. They do not own that. And a man who keeps that one thing quietly, without shouting, with his voice level and his eyes on the far stone and 4 honey-colored cases sitting untouched at his feet. That man has more than they can ever take from him, even on the day they take everything else. I keep the gate. It is no part of my duty to carry another soul's burden on demand, and I never will. But the gate itself, the keeping of it, the standing for the thing it stands for, the refusing, every single day, to be made furniture, that is my duty, the whole of it, and I would not trade it for every name and carriage that ever came up the drive. A guest once ordered me to carry her bags. I pointed her to the staff entrance, and I told her plainly that it was not my duty. It was the best day's work I ever did at the gate, and I did it standing still.